The smell reaches you before the man does. That's the part they leave out of the history books, the part that doesn't fit in the engraving on the $5 bill, or the portrait that hangs in every school hallway in America. You're standing in the East Room of the White House. It is March of 1863. You have waited 2 hours for this moment, in a line of people who have also waited 2 hours, all of you clutching your petitions and your letters and your carefully rehearsed opening sentences. And now the doors open and you shuffle forward, and the smell arrives about 4 feet before the man himself does. It is wool first, dark wool that has been in contact with a working human body for longer than you'd expect from the head of state of a nation of 30 million people. Then something underneath the wool, something warmer, the smell of a body that runs a very high temperature, which Abraham Lincoln does. He always runs warm. People who shake his hand remember how hot it is, and underneath that the faint ghost of wood smoke that lives in him like a birthright, that came from log cabins and circuit court taverns and one-room offices over decades and never fully left. Then something sharper. Coffee. He drinks it constantly, and it has made a home in him. And somewhere beneath all of that, faintly, the smell of a man who was up until 2 a.m. reading dispatches from a battlefield where 700 people died in a single afternoon, and who did not, in the process, make time for a bath. He holds out his hand. It is enormous, rough as dried bark across the palm, warm, genuinely warm and dry. You shake it. He looks at you, really looks at you, with those eyes that everyone describes eventually, grey and deep set and doing something that shouldn't be possible in a human face, which is seeing you entirely without appearing to judge you, and he says, "Tell me what you came to tell me." And you forget for a second about the smell. That is Abraham Lincoln. That is the effect. That is the trick, if trick is the right word, which it isn't, because nothing about it is calculated. The smell and the hair and the suit that has been through some things, and the boots that have given up any relationship with Polish, all of it stops mattering the moment the attention lands on you. The full, terrible, undistracted attention of a man who does not give you part of himself. He gives you everything or nothing at all. Right now it is everything, and so the smell doesn't matter, and the weight didn't matter, and whatever you came to say, you say it. And he listens, and somewhere underneath the listening he is also thinking about the war, and the next dispatch and the letter he owes to a general in Tennessee. But you don't know that, and it doesn't matter, because in this moment you are real to him. You are a human being and not a category, and he is treating you accordingly. You leave the East Room thinking about almost nothing except what just happened to you. The smell follows you down the corridor for a moment, then dissipates into the cold March air of Washington, D.C., and it's gone. And what remains is the meeting, and the hands, and those eyes. But this isn't about the effect he had on people. This is about the man himself, the body, the actual lived experience of Abraham Lincoln moving through the world in the skin and suit and hair that he actually had. Because here's the thing about hagiography. The particular genre of history writing where a great person becomes a symbol, and the symbol floats free of gravity and cold floors and laundry. Here's the thing. It lies by omission. It takes the man out of the body. It puts him in the portrait, straight-spined and grave and brushed. And the portrait is accurate in certain ways. The dignity is real, the gravity is real. But it is silent on the things that portraits are always silent on. The smell, the hair, the teeth, the suit. The particular quality of a man who grew up understanding that the body is something you use, not something you tend, and who never quite updated that understanding no matter how far from the log cabin he travelled. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket up. We're going back a long way. February of 1809, Hardin County, Kentucky. The temperature outside the sinking spring cabin, which is what this shelter is usually called by historians because of the spring on the property that provides water, has been below freezing for 3 weeks. The cabin is one room. It is roughly 14 feet by 16 feet, which is smaller than most modern studio apartments, and significantly smaller than most modern garages. It is made of notched logs with clay chinking between them, which means it is a structure that blocks most of the wind most of the time unless the clay has shrunk in the cold, which it has, so there are gaps, and the gaps breathe. You are born in this cabin on the 12th of February. You don't remember this, obviously. Nobody remembers being born. But the body remembers things the mind doesn't. And the first thing your body learns, in the first hours of its existence, is cold. The cold of a Kentucky February that has already been cold for weeks and is not finished being cold. The cold of a room heated by a single stone fireplace that does its best and is not always enough. The cold of a world that doesn't particularly adjust itself to the fact that a person has just arrived in it. Your mother Nancy is 31 years old. She has done this before. She had your sister Sarah 2 years ago in another cabin, and she has the particular competence of a frontier woman who understands that the body's business is the body's business, and it will continue with or without ceremony. She wraps you. She puts you near the fire. She's already thinking about tomorrow. Your father, Thomas, is 31 years old, and he is good with his hands and not much with anything else, and he loves your mother in the way of a man who doesn't say it, but would do anything for her, which means splitting rails and hauling water and being there when it matters, even when he doesn't know what to say. The first smell you encounter in the world is wood smoke, not your mother's skin, not the particular clean warmth that infants in modern delivery rooms encounter. The scent of a room that has been washed, of blankets that have been laundered, of the controlled and disinfected air of modern medicine. Just wood smoke. It is the baseline smell of your entire childhood and significant portions of your adult life, and it settles into you in those first hours like a resident rather than a visitor. Your first bath, if it can be called that, happens later that day. Water from the spring, heated in the iron pot over the fire. Rough cloth, quick and practical, the way everything on the frontier is quick and practical, because there is always something else that needs doing, and sentiment is a luxury that waits in line behind necessity. The cabin is not clean by any standard you'd recognise. Clean on the frontier is a word that describes approximate states rather than achieved conditions. The floor is dirt, actual compacted earth. The smoke from the fireplace doesn't always go up the chimney. Sometimes it chooses the room. The bedding is whatever could be gathered and layered. Bear skins, woven wool blankets, old cloth, everything piled to a depth that creates warmth by sheer mass. The smell of the bedding is the smell of everything that has been near it, which is people and animals and fire and the particular deep, warm smell of things that have been alive for a long time without interruption. This is your first home. You live here for 2 years, and then your father moves the family across the river into Indiana, which is part of a larger story about land titles and arguments over who owns what in Kentucky, and that story matters for American history but doesn't matter for right now. What matters is that you cross the Ohio River in December, in winter, on a flatboat loaded with whatever the family owns, which isn't much, and you arrive in Indiana and your father builds a camp, and then a half-faced cabin, which is not a full cabin, it is 3 walls and a lean-to roof and one side open to the weather, and you spend the first winter in Indiana in a structure that is genuinely open to the elements. Open! A 3-sided shelter in an Indiana winter. You are 2 years old. The temperature in Indiana in January can drop well below 0 Fahrenheit. The wind off the flat plains is brutal in a way that has nothing to do with romance. You sleep in the half-faced camp pressed between your parents and your sister, sharing warmth the way animals share it, out of pure biological necessity. Your father feeds the fire through the night, because not feeding the fire in a 3-sided shelter in Indiana in January is the kind of choice that doesn't get made twice. You're not washed with any regularity during this winter. This isn't negligence. This is logistics. Washing requires water, and warming. That water requires fire, and fire requires wood, and wood requires cutting, and there is already more cutting of wood than any family can comfortably manage just to stay alive. Bathing, the warming and carrying of water, and the actual process of washing a child is something that happens when the conditions permit it, and the conditions in the winter of 1816 in Indiana don't often permit it. So you are, by modern standards, filthy. But you're also warm. You're also alive. You're also, in the particular way of very young children, completely indifferent to the dirt on your face and the smell of your hair and the weeks between washings. You're 2 years old. The body's primary business at 2 is eating and sleeping and learning to walk, and the smell doesn't register as a problem because you have nothing to compare it to. This is the smell of the world. The world smells like this. Of course it does. By the time your father finishes the proper cabin, a full log structure with 4 walls and a proper roof and a chimney that mostly works, you're old enough to remember things. Not with the precision of adult memory, not in stored sentences and organized narratives, but in the way of bodies and textures and temperatures. You remember the feel of a dirt floor under bare feet. You remember the particular orange quality of firelight. You remember the weight of blankets piled high enough to create their own warm darkness underneath. You remember the cold floor in the morning. That will be with you forever. The cold floor in the morning. Every morning of your life, in every room you ever sleep in, the cabin, the boarding house, the White House, the floor will be cold in the morning, and your feet will find it, and something in you will say yes. This. I know this. This is how the day begins. The cabin proper, once it exists, is slightly better than the half-face shelter. Slightly. There are 4 walls. There is a loft where you and Sarah sleep, reached by a ladder of wooden pegs driven into the wall. The loft has no window and very little headroom, and in summer it is extremely hot, and in winter the heat from the fireplace below rises to it and makes it the warmest place in the building, which is its primary virtue. The smell in the loft is the smell of 2 children sleeping in their clothes, because that is what happens in cold weather. You sleep in what you wear. You take off your shoes if you have shoes that need taking off, and sometimes not even that. And you pile the blankets on, and you sleep in the warmth you make with your own body. Water in this cabin comes from a spring a 1/4 mile away. In summer, you can make the trip in about 5 minutes. In winter, in mud season, in the times when the path is iced over or the creek between here and there is running high, it takes longer. You carry it in a wooden bucket. 2 buckets make a serious load for an adult. For a child making this trip, 2 trips with 1 bucket each is about the maximum. You make this trip with your mother. You learn early that water is heavy and comes from a distance and needs to be used carefully. This is a lesson the bones learn, not just the mind. The body that carries water from a spring a quarter-mile away through an Indiana February understands water differently than a body that turns a tap. It understands water as something earned, as something with weight, as something you think about before you use it, because using it means gonna get more. You don't waste water. You don't waste it on bathing when there are other needs. Not when it has to be warmed over a fire that also needs wood. Not when there is corn to grind and salt pork to salt down and a dozen other things that water is needed for. Your mother bathes you and Sarah on Sundays when conditions permit, which is not every Sunday. She uses lye soap she makes herself from wood ash and rendered fat. The lye soap is harsh enough to strip grease from a cast iron pan, which is one of its uses, and it does the same work on skin with somewhat less consideration for the skin's preferences. It stings, it dries, but it gets you clean. The functional kind of clean that means no visible dirt rather than the laboratory level clean that means no bacteria. This is your education in personal hygiene. The education doesn't include the concept of a daily bath. It doesn't include the idea of changing your shirt more than once a week. It includes washing your hands before you eat because your mother insists on it, and washing your face in the morning if there's water in the basin that hasn't frozen, and the Sunday bath when conditions permit. That's it. That is the entire curriculum of cleanliness that the frontier offers a child born in a log cabin in 1809, and then your mother dies. October of 1818. You're 9 years old. She is 34. The disease is called milk sickness by the people who live in Indiana. And it's what happens when you drink milk from a cow that has been eating white snake root, a plant that grows in the shaded hollows of the Indiana forest. The toxin passes from the plant into the cow's milk and from the milk into whoever drinks it. It comes on fast, and its symptoms are vomiting and weakness and a trembling in the muscles that gets worse rather than better. And then it kills you, if it's going to kill you, over the course of a week or 10 days, and you feel everything that's happening. She is sick on a Tuesday. She is dead by the following Tuesday. You know she is dying before she's dead. Children on the frontier learn early that the body's business is serious business. Your father knows she is dying. He sits with her and he holds her hand, and he is not a man who talks much, but he talks now, quietly, in the way of people at bedsides who understand the conversation is ending. She tells you to be good, to be kind, to love your father and your sister. These are the last things she says to you. You carry them your entire life. She's buried on a hill near the cabin. Your father makes the coffin himself from green lumber, which is the only lumber there is. The nails are expensive and he uses them carefully. The coffin is plain without any ornamentation because there is no tradition of ornamentation and no materials for it. And this is the frontier, and grief is private. No minister comes for the burial. A minister comes later, weeks later, after the ground has frozen and then thawed slightly, and says the formal words over the mound of earth. And you stand there in your best clothes, which are the only clothes you have but recently washed, and you listen to the words, and they land somewhere but not where words usually land. They land in the body, in the stomach, in the part of you that was cold in the morning before she was gone, and is cold in the morning now and will be cold in the morning forever, and the coldness feels different now. She is gone. Your father does what men in his situation did in 1818, which is the only thing available to a man with 2 children and no one to raise them. He goes back to Kentucky to find a wife. He is gone for weeks. During those weeks, you and Sarah keep yourselves alive. You are 9 and she is 11. You start fires. You fetch water. You cook the corn mush and the salt pork in the iron pot. You make sure the firewood doesn't run out, which means splitting more, and the axe is heavy for a 9-year-old and you feel it in your shoulders for days. You keep each other company in the dark of the loft. You do not wash with any regularity. There is no one to heat the water. There is no one to get out the lye soap. You wipe your face in the morning with the hem of your shirt and you go about your day. What you smell like at the end of those weeks is not something anyone writes down. But you can figure it out. Your father comes back with a woman named Sarah Bush Johnston and 3 children of her own and a determination to make this work. She arrives in Indiana with actual furniture, not the frontier approximation of furniture, but real pieces, a wooden chest and a bureau, and a spinning wheel and bedding that she brought from Kentucky. She looks at the cabin and the 2 children inside it, and her expression does something that is very hard to read, unless you understand that she is a practical woman who has just taken on a serious problem and is immediately assessing how to solve it. She starts with the children. She heats water. She finds the lye soap, or she makes more. She scrubs you and Sarah with a rough cloth and warm water, firmly and efficiently, in the way of someone who knows that being gentle about it just makes it take longer. The water in the basin turns grey. She changes the water and does it again. For the first time in months you smell clean. It is a strange sensation. Not comfortable exactly. The lye soap has done its work on your skin, and your face feels tight and dry in the way of something that has had its natural oils removed, but fundamentally different. Like the air is different. Like the space between yourself and the world has changed. She also combs your hair. This is an event. Your hair, at 9 years old, has been doing what it wanted for approximately 2 months, which is to say it has been doing what it would continue to do for the next 56 years, taking instructions from nobody and going its own way. It is dark and thick and inclined toward a kind of volumetric independence that no comb has ever fully addressed. Your stepmother addresses it now, with a comb and considerable patience, and a grip that suggests she has done this with reluctant children before and intends to prevail. She does prevail. Your hair, for approximately 4 hours, is organized. Then it does what it does. She also brings books. This is the part that changes everything. More than the bath, more than the combed hair. She brings books, real books, not just the Bible, which you already have. Aesop's Fables, Robinson Crusoe, the Arabian Nights, which in this period is available in an English translation that is somewhat simplified for general audiences, but still contains the essential quality of the original, which is that it will take you somewhere else entirely. You lie on the dirt floor near the fire and you read. You read the way you will read for the rest of your life, which is completely, not skimming, not reading for the summary, reading with your whole self, each word getting its full moment. This sentence is building their architecture in your mind one beam at a time. You read until the fire burns low and your eyes ache and your stepmother tells you to come to bed. You go to bed thinking about Robinson Crusoe. You don't think about your hair. This is the pattern. This is the choice that is being made, though it doesn't feel like a choice when you're 10 years old lying on the floor of a log cabin in Indiana. It feels like the most natural thing in the world. The books are here. The books are interesting. The bath has been handled already today, and besides, the water isn't hot anymore. You read instead. You keep reading. Through your childhood and into your adolescence, you read everything you can find, which in this part of Indiana is limited to what circulates among neighbours and what your stepmother brought and what can be borrowed from people within a reasonable distance. The revised statutes of Indiana, the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, the Bible, which you know nearly entire by this point, not from piety exactly, but from the way the language fits in the mind, the particular cadences of the King James Version that will show up in your own writing for the rest of your life. You grow while you read. This is the part of the story that seems impossible until you understand that it is completely true. You grow to 6 feet, then 6 feet 2, then 6 feet 4, which is your full height by the time you're 17 or 18. And this height is remarkable in 1826, in a way that it's hard to fully convey because you didn't grow up with photographs of historical people, and so you don't have a calibrated sense of how much shorter everyone was. The average American man in 1820 is approximately 5 feet 7 or 8 inches tall. You are 6 feet 4. You walk into a room and you are the tallest person in it, always, by a significant margin. People stop what they're doing to look at you. The height creates complications. Clothes first. Nothing fits a 6'4" young man in Indiana in 1826 because nothing is made for him. Clothes are either sewn at home, and your family's resources for home sewing are limited, or bought from a store, and the store's range doesn't extend to your dimensions. Your trousers end 6 inches above your ankles. Your shirt sleeves stop at the wrist. Your coat, when you have a coat, was made for a shorter man, and the shoulders are wrong in a way that no amount of adjustment fully corrects. You look, always, like someone who has recently grown and hasn't had the chance to address the consequences. This will be true for the rest of your life, not because you can't afford clothes once you're a lawyer and then a president, but because the relationship between your body and its clothing was established early, and the basic terms never fully renegotiated. You will always look to some extent like a man in clothes that aren't quite right. Mary will spend decades working on this. It'll be a draw. Water, second. 6'4" requires more water than shorter men for drinking and cooking, and you have established in the marrow of your bones the understanding that water has weight and comes from a distance. You do not pour it out carelessly. You use what you need. What you need for bathing remains throughout your life somewhat less than what most people would consider the minimum. This is not a conscious philosophy. You don't get up in the morning and decide not to bathe. It's more that the decision not to bathe requires no energy, no resistance, while the decision to bathe requires planning and warm water and time that could be spent reading or thinking, or doing something that the day actually demands. The path of least resistance is the path you take. The path of least resistance has led you away from lye soap since you were old enough to avoid it. By the time you're 20, you have grown into the height and into yourself, and you have several skills. You can split rails, which you do for hire when you need money, and you can split them faster than almost anyone because the mechanical advantage of 6'4" arms and hands that have been doing this since childhood is considerable. You can build things. You can handle a flatboat on the Mississippi River, which you do when a neighbour pays you to take goods to New Orleans, and the trip down and back teaches you things about the country, and about people and about yourself that no book has quite managed. You can read faster than anyone you know. You can make people laugh. The making people laugh skill is, at 20, your best skill after rail splitting, and arguably more useful for your long-term prospects. You're funny in a specific way that is hard to describe until you hear it. which is the way of a man who has observed the world closely without the social training that tells you what you're not supposed to notice and say. You notice everything. You say it. The combination produces stories and observations that hit something true in people, and the truth, when it arrives in the form of the unexpected, makes people laugh until they hurt. You also, by 20, smell like a young man who works hard outdoors and doesn't bathe with any particular regularity, and wears his clothes until they need replacement, which is past the point where most people would have replaced them. This combination of smells, outdoor labour and old wool, and the particular warmth of a large body running hot, is not offensive by the standards of your time and place. Most people you know smell similar. The frontier is not a culture of personal scent management. But you want to be a lawyer. This complicates things slightly. The law. You decide you want to be a lawyer, and you pursue this the way you pursue everything, which is by reading. You borrow a copy of Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England from a neighbour. 4 volumes, thick. The foundational legal text of the English-speaking world, the thing every lawyer in America in this period has read, the architecture upon which American law is built. You read it lying on the floor. This is your characteristic position for reading, on your back or on your stomach, on whatever surface is available near whatever light there is. Herndon, your future law partner, will describe finding you on the floor of your office years later and saying something about it, and you'll say that you are taller lying down than any piece of furniture as yet accommodated. This is true. This is also not the whole truth. The whole truth is that you lie on the floor because you've always lain on the floor, and it is comfortable in the way that everything familiar is comfortable. You read Blackstone on the floor of whatever room you're in. You read it with the same completeness you bring to everything else. You read it until it lives inside you. In 1836 you pass the Illinois bar examination. You're 27 years old. You've had approximately 18 months of formal schooling total in your life, spread across several years in one-room schoolhouses with teachers who knew only marginally more than their students. You've never attended a high school. You've never attended a college. You've read Blackstone on the floor, and you are now a lawyer. Springfield, Illinois, the state capital, population around 1,500 when you arrive in 1837, growing fast, a city by frontier standards, which is to say it has more than one street with more than one building on it, and some of those buildings have glass in the windows, and there is a courthouse. You move to Springfield with $7 in your pocket, your possessions in a pair of saddlebags, and a letter of introduction to a store owner named Joshua Speed, who will become your closest friend, and who has a room above the store where you can sleep on the bed already there. You share the bed with Speed. This is completely normal. You have shared beds your whole life. The frontier doesn't have the concept of sleeping alone as a standard. Sleeping alone is what rich people do, and you are not rich. Speed's bed is large enough for 2 men, and you are one of the men, and this is where you sleep for the next several years. Your law office is a room with a desk and some law books and whatever correspondence has accumulated on all the horizontal surfaces, and the desk is made of wood, and the chair is made of wood, and the floor is wood, which represents an upgrade from dirt, and the room has a window. It is not a large room. It is the room of a small-town lawyer at the beginning of his career, which is what you are. William Herndon joins the practice eventually as your junior partner, and Herndon will spend the rest of his life taking notes on you with the devotion of a man who understands that he is standing next to something important and owes it to posterity to get it down accurately. His notes on the office describe a state of organised chaos that makes him sound slightly distressed even on paper. Papers in piles that only you can navigate, books open at various angles, an indefinite collection of things stuffed into the lining of your hat because you've used the hat as a filing system since you first had a hat. The hat. You wear a stovepipe hat. It's the standard professional headwear for a man of your standing in this era, and it serves multiple functions. It adds height, which in your case gives the effect of someone who has ducked under the doorframe and not quite fully straightened up. It functions as a storage container, which is an unusual use of headwear, but you find it practical. And it is the single most recognizable element of your physical appearance, the thing that future illustrators and cartoonists and sculptors will reach for immediately when they want to convey Lincolnness in a single image. Under the hat, the hair. The hair is already a subject at this stage. Not yet a national subject, not yet the thing that every correspondent mentions and every illustrator renders with a certain helpless comedy. But in Springfield it is known. The hair does what the hair does, which is everything it wants to. And what it wants is volume and direction, and a generally westward movement that no comb has ever been fully able to redirect. You own a comb. You use it sometimes. The results are temporary. You practice law. You get good at it. Not because you had a smooth path to competence, but because the same quality that makes you good at reading, the completeness, the willingness to sit with an argument until every part of it is understood, makes you good at constructing a legal case. You don't skim cases. You don't look for shortcuts. You find the thing that is true, and you build from the thing that is true outward until the structure is solid enough to hold. Judges on the 8th Judicial Circuit of Illinois, which you're about to start riding regularly, remember you. Not just for the law, though that comes to be respected, for the stories. The circuit. The 8th Judicial Circuit is a loop through 14 counties of central Illinois. Twice a year, in spring and autumn, the judge and the lawyers who practice before him pack their things and their horses and they go. Bloomington to Metamora to Tremont to Pekin to Lincoln to Springfield and around. The whole route taking about 3 months, stopping in each county seat for the cases that have accumulated there. You ride it for years. Not every lawyer on the circuit does the whole loop. Some go for the cases in certain counties and skip others. You do the whole thing. The whole 3 months. Every county. Every courthouse. Herndon finds this slightly baffling. He doesn't see why you would stay away from home for 3 months when you could be in Springfield. He misses the point. You like the circuit. You like it because it's motion. And you are a man who thinks better when something is moving. You like it because each county has its own texture, its own population, its own particular kind of dispute that reflects the particulars of how people live there. You like it because the taverns and the boarding houses and the country stores at the crossroads where you stop are full of people with stories, and you are an omnivorous collector of stories, and you like it, though you would not say this in these terms because it gives you 3 months away from the expectation of regular bathing. On the circuit, you sleep wherever there is room. The county seat taverns are the better option, where better means 4 to 6 men in a room rather than 8 to 12, where better means the beds have mattresses of some kind, where better means the food is something other than what you could have assembled yourself in a field with minimal tools. The beds are shared. This is not a choice. There are simply more lawyers on the circuit than there are single-occupancy beds in rural Illinois in the 1840s. You share with whoever is assigned the same room. Sometimes it's a judge. Sometimes it's a lawyer from another firm whose professional opinions you respect and whose personal habits you are now going to learn about in considerable detail. Sometimes it's someone you've never met before and will never see again. You all smell like the road. The road in central Illinois in 1840 is not a road in any modern sense. It is a track, sometimes paved with logs laid sideways in the mud, more often just dirt compacted by repeated passage, and in wet weather it becomes a particular kind of central Illinois mud that is almost elastic in its resistance, that grabs at horse hooves and boots and wagon wheels and does not release without a sucking sound. Your boots acquire layers of this mud. The layers dry and crack and acquire new layers, and the boots become objects of geological interest, strata of seasons visible on the sides. You don't oil the boots regularly. Oiling boots requires oil and a brush, and the intention to do it before the boots get bad enough that you notice them, and the intention gets preempted by other things. The boots do their job. They carry you where you're going. They are boots. Your suit on the circuit is the suit you brought for the circuit. It goes 3 months between serious cleanings. It accumulates everything the circuit accumulates. Wood fire smoke, horse, mud. The specific warm smell of a body wearing wool in weather that ranges from cold to very warm as the season progresses. At the end of the spring circuit or the fall circuit, the suit has a history. It has been places, and it smells like all of them. The lawyers who ride with you know this. They know you. The full you, not the public version. David Davis, the circuit judge who will manage your presidential campaign in 1860, has shared accommodation with you on dozens of occasions, and has a comprehensive knowledge of your personal habits that he keeps largely to himself. The knowledge includes: you're an excellent storyteller who will hold a tavern room captive until midnight, with stories if you get the chance. You sleep in your shirt, your boots come off but your stockings usually don't. You're warm enough to sleep near without being oppressive. You don't snore much, occasionally. And you smell like a man who is doing the whole circuit because that is what you are. None of this stops anyone from liking you. This is the thing that consistently fails to follow the logic you'd expect it to. The smell and the hair and the suit that has been through some things should, by the rules of social commerce as they exist in the 19th century, be marks against you. Personal presentation matters, especially for a lawyer who is beginning to make his name in politics, who is losing a race for Congress in 1843 and winning one in 1846 and losing again in 1848, who is building a reputation that extends by the early 1850s, well past the borders of central Illinois. The reputation should be undermined by the suit. It isn't. Because the suit and the hair and the rest of it carry in them the same message as the stories and the attention and the way he listens. They say, I am not performing. I am not assembling a version of myself for your inspection. I am the thing itself, the actual unmediated thing. And the thing is this: a man who is interested in you, who finds you interesting, who wants to know what you know and think what you think and sit with you in a cold tavern in Metamora, Illinois, and tell you about a time he was on a flatboat on the Mississippi, and 2 things happened that neither of them saw coming. That's what the presentation says, even when the presentation is a disaster. And Mary Todd sees through to exactly this. Mary Todd is 21 years old when you meet her at a cotillion in Springfield in 1839 or 1840. The date is slightly uncertain, and she's from Lexington, Kentucky, which might as well be Paris compared to the Indiana frontier. Her father is a wealthy banker. She attended private schools in Lexington. She speaks French, actual French. not the approximate French of someone who studied it briefly, but the fluid conversational French of someone who's been speaking it since she was a girl. She has opinions about politics that she expresses directly and without apology, which is unusual for a woman of her era and class, and her political opinions turn out to be exactly right. She's also, by contemporary accounts, small and pretty, and possessed of a wit that people describe with words like sharp and brilliant and occasionally overwhelming, this last being used affectionately by people who find the sharp precision of her mind slightly more than they expected. You dance with her at the cotillion, or possibly you are introduced at someone's house. The precise circumstances are disputed. What is not disputed is the conversation. People who were present describe a conversation that lasted longer than the social occasion strictly required, the two of you in a corner, her talking and you listening, and then you talking and her listening in a way that says she hasn't expected someone to say exactly that, and you going back and forth past the point where other people would have excused themselves for another dance. She finds you remarkable. Remarkable, which is different from handsome and different from impressive and different from successful, and means, in her case, exactly what it sounds like. You're remarkably interesting to her in a way she didn't anticipate. You find her remarkable too. A woman who talks about politics at a party, who has read things and thought about them and formed opinions that she'll defend in an argument, who sees the logic in what you say and pushes back on the parts that don't hold. You court her. It is not a smooth courtship. There is a broken engagement in 1841 that comes from your depression, which is severe enough during this period that your friends remove razors from your room because they're worried about what you might do with them, which tells you something about the depths of it. And then a period of separation, and then a reconciliation, and finally, in November of 1842, a marriage. Mary has a project. The project is you. She is not, let's be clear about this, a woman who married a project under the impression it was something else. She knew what she was getting. She saw the suit on the circuit and the hair at the cotillion, and she married you anyway. But she has ideas about what the marriage will look like, about the kind of household they will run together, about the impression the Lincolns of Springfield, Illinois will make on the world they're moving through. And then there is the reality. The reality includes your shirt. You have a theory about shirts, which is that they continue to function as shirts for a considerable period, beyond the point at which most people would have retired them. The shirt's function is to cover the body and absorb whatever the body produces, and it does this faithfully for a number of days that you consider satisfactory, and Mary considers well past satisfactory, into a range she does not have a polite word for. The gap between your assessment of a shirt's useful life and hers is approximately 2 to 3 days, consistently, across the entire marriage. The reality also includes your hair. Mary is meticulous about her own appearance. Her dresses are chosen with care and maintained with care, and she understands that the way she presents herself is a statement in the male-dominated social world of Springfield about who she is and what she should be taken seriously for. She extends this understanding to you, with the patience of someone who is working on a long-term project and has decided to take victories where they come. Before important occasions, a court appearance with a well-to-do client, a political event where you need to make an impression, a dinner with people whose opinions matter. She works on you. She combs the hair. She ensures the shirt is the good one, recently washed. She checks the boots. She sends you out looking, if not exactly like the version of Abraham Lincoln on the official portrait, then at least like a man who's engaged with the concept of personal grooming in the recent past, for about 40 minutes. Then the hair does what it does. You are aware of this cycle. You see it happen. Mary combs, the hair complies briefly, and then the hair remembers itself and returns to its natural state, which is a three-dimensional diagram of what happens when a dark and thick and fundamentally democratic collection of follicles refuses to take instructions from anyone. You make a joke about it sometimes. You make jokes about most things. The jokes about your appearance are among your best because they come from a place of genuine, comfortable indifference, not from defensiveness. And genuine, comfortable indifference produces better jokes than defensiveness almost every time. The joke about the axe. Someone says you're ugly and you say you can't help my face, and they say yes, but you could stay home, is probably apocryphal but fits the pattern exactly. The jokes about your looks are always jokes that take the criticism and make it the setup for a punchline that suggests you find the criticism more interesting than alarming. Which you do. The domestic life in Springfield is modest. You move into a boarding house initially, and then into a rented house, and eventually you buy the house on the corner of 8th and Jackson that is now a museum, a Greek revival house with a wooden fence and shuttered windows, the house where you'll live until you leave for Washington in 1861. The house represents for Mary the architecture of the life she's building. It represents for you a place where the books can live and where the fire is usually warm enough. The house has a cistern for water, which is an improvement over the spring a quarter-mile away. It also has a privy in the backyard, which is what everyone in Springfield uses because the city doesn't have indoor plumbing, and indoor plumbing as a concept for private residences is still decades away from being standard anywhere in America. The privy is cold in winter and fragrant in summer, and you use it with the same matter-of-fact relationship to bodily functions that the frontier instilled in you, which is, the body does what the body does, and it does it here, and now we move on. The bathing in the Springfield house happens on Saturday nights when conditions permit, which is more frequently than the circuit, and less frequently than Mary would ideally structure it. Hot water from the stove poured into the portable tin tub, and you climb in with the philosophical attitude of someone who understands that this is going to happen and has made his peace with it, Saturday nights when conditions don't permit. And conditions often don't permit because you're preparing for a case or reading something that needs to be finished, or there's a political meeting, or you fell asleep in the chair by the fire before the water was ready. The Saturday night bath slides to Sunday, or to the following week, or to a vague future that hasn't quite arrived yet. Mary manages this. She manages many things. She is an excellent manager, though history has not always been kind about describing it that way, because managing things in the 19th century when you are a woman is called something else. Things like being difficult or being demanding or being a handful, and Mary is retroactively described in these terms by people who would never describe a man who managed a household and a career and 3 to 4 children and a husband with the organizational habits of a particularly interesting tornado as a handful. She is managing, you appreciate it in your way. You show appreciation in the form of things. A new dress, a carriage, household items that she wants and that you buy when you can afford them. And in the form of attention, the deep listening that you give to everything, and in the form of tolerance for her own considerable storms of personality, because Mary is not a calm woman, and she is not pretending to be a calm woman, and you do not require her to be one. You take her seriously. In an era that does not, as a rule, take women seriously, you take her seriously. It's not enough for the hair, but it's something. The circuit taverns at night have their own ecosystem, and you are part of it. The tavern in Danville, Illinois, in the autumn of 1848 is a building of 2 stories, the lower floor divided between a barroom and a dining room that converts to a sleeping room after supper, and the upper floor a single large dormitory with 8 beds and whoever needs them. Tonight there are 11 lawyers and a judge and 1 man who claims to be a land agent, and is probably something more complicated, and between them they occupy the beds, 2 to a mattress, and 1 man on the floor with his coat as a blanket, and he drew the short straw, and has accepted it with the equanimity of a man who has drawn short straws before. You are in the corner bed with Henry Whitney, a young lawyer from Urbana, who has been riding the circuit for 2 seasons and has become, in the way of circuit riders, something like a friend. Whitney is 24 and still has the slightly unset quality of a man who doesn't know yet what kind of lawyer he's going to be. He knows what kind of lawyer he wants to be, the successful kind, but the specifics are unresolved. You have been talking for 2 hours. This is normal. This happens in tavern rooms on the circuit when you are present. The conversation starts at supper and the supper plates get cleared and someone brings more cider and the conversation continues and the candles burn down and nobody goes upstairs because the thing that is happening in this room is too interesting to leave. Tonight you're talking about the law, about a case you tried last week in Metamora, a murder case, a man accused of killing his wife's brother in a dispute about land, and the way the facts arranged themselves into a story that was true, but that the truth of which was not obvious until you built it from the ground up, showed the jury the foundation, and then the walls, and then the roof, and they saw it. They could see the whole shape of it by the end, and they came back with the right verdict. Whitney is listening the way young lawyers listen when they are learning something that isn't in Blackstone. The other men in the room are listening too, some of them pretending not to. David Davis, the judge, is in the bed directly across the room and appears to be reading, but he hasn't turned a page in 20 minutes. You talk about the case for 45 minutes, which is about 30 minutes longer than most men would take to describe a single case because you don't skip the parts that seem like they don't matter. The parts that seem like they don't matter are often where the truth is hiding, and if you skip them you miss it. Then you tell a story about a mule. The story about the mule is not about the law. It is about something that happened when you were 17 in Indiana, and a neighbour's mule got into a situation that the neighbour had explained incorrectly for the next 12 years, and the way the incorrect explanation had propagated through the county like a disease, becoming accepted fact until an unrelated incident required the original situation to be re-examined and the whole edifice of incorrect understanding collapsed. The story takes 20 minutes. By the end of it, everyone in the room who'd been pretending to be asleep or busy is openly listening and laughing, because the story is funny in the specific architectural way your stories are funny, where you build the structure carefully so that when the punchline comes it bears the weight of everything underneath it. Davis puts down his book. He laughs. You've been doing this for years on the circuit. The storytelling in tavern rooms at night, after the law is done for the day. It is not performance. It is the thing your mind does naturally, which is to find the story inside any situation and extract it and give it to people. The story about the mule is true. You don't invent stories, you find them. The invented ones don't work the same way. Whitney, much later in his life, writes a memoir of the circuit years. He describes these nights in detail that suggests he understood, even at 24, that he was watching something that wouldn't happen twice. He describes the room. He describes the candles burning down. He describes Lincoln's voice, which he says was higher than you'd expect from a man of that size. High and carrying, with a quality of flatness in it that made everything he said sound like plain statement rather than argument. He describes the stories. He does not describe the smell. He was used to it by then. The morning after these nights you rise with the others, wash your face if there is water in the basin, which there usually is by morning, cold, and you eat whatever the tavern provides, which is usually eggs and cornbread and coffee, and you saddle your horse and you ride to the next county seat. The next county seat has cases waiting. The road between here and there is mud in October, and the mud grabs at old Buck's hooves in the familiar way, and your trouser legs are spattered before the first mile, and your boots have mud to the ankle, and the October Illinois sky is doing what October Illinois skis do, which is considering rain, examining the idea carefully, and then going ahead with it. You ride in the rain. Your coat is wool, and wool in rain has the smell of wet wool, which is a specific and powerful smell, the smell of the fibre returning to something like what it was before it was spun, a warm animal smell that is not unpleasant exactly, but is insistent. The coat does its work. You arrive at the next county seat damp and smelling of wet wool and horse and the road. The courthouse is waiting. The cases are waiting. You hang up the coat and you go to work. This is the circuit. This is 3 months, twice a year for years. This is where your practice is built and where your name spreads through central Illinois, and where you tell the story about the mule in a dozen different tavern rooms to a dozen different collections of lawyers and judges and land agents and whoever else is in the room. And it is always slightly different because you are always slightly different. You learn the story as you tell it. You find new angles in it. And by the end of the circuit years, the story about the mule is a different story than it was at the beginning, and is better. This is also where your smell accumulates. The circuit smell. The particular combination of road and rain and tavern and horse and wool, and the accumulated biological biography of a man who is out for 3 months and doesn't bathe more than the circumstances permit, which is to say, not often. You bring it home to Mary every spring and every fall. She opens the door and she takes a breath and her face does something complicated, and then she says, "Come in, Abraham," and she means it, because whatever the smell is, she's been waiting for the man inside it for 3 months. This is marriage. This specific, particular, unrepeatable marriage. This woman from Kentucky who speaks French and has opinions about politics, waiting at the door of the Springfield house for a man who smells like the road and has stories about a mule. She combs his hair and she throws the suit at the laundress and she puts a kettle on for the bath, and she is glad he is home. He is glad to be home. They have been doing this for years. They will do it for 19 years total. The hair and the boots and the suit will be a constant point of negotiation the entire time, the negotiation that never fully resolves because the term's not resolvable, because one person believes the body requires tending and the other believes the body requires deploying, and these are not actually reconcilable positions, but you can live within the gap between them if you respect each other, and they do, fundamentally, in the way of two people who see each other clearly and have chosen this anyway. Mary, in later years, in the hard years, in the White House years when everything's enormous and the grief and the war and the scrutiny are enormous, Mary will be described by the newspapers in terms that are not always kind. She will be described as extravagant, as difficult, as insufficiently loyal because of her Kentucky family and her Confederate sympathizing brothers. She will be described in terms that a woman in her position in the 19th century had no mechanism for answering. But the man who lived with her in the private rooms knows something the newspapers don't. She is managing. She has always been managing. The management is not glamorous. It involves, among other things, the combing of a man's hair before important occasions, the maintenance of the suit, the ensuring of the Saturday night bath, the production of a household that runs coherently in the middle of a war that is killing 300 people a day. She's doing the work that keeps the whole enterprise visible. She is the layer of presentation between Abraham Lincoln as he actually is, the man on the floor with the map, the man who fell asleep in the chair with his boots on, the man who smells of the road, and Abraham Lincoln as the president needs to appear. Both are real. Both are him. The White House in 1862 receives, among its other visitors, the British journalist Edward Dicey, who comes to America to write about the war, and who secures an interview with the president. Dicey is an excellent observer and an honest reporter, and his account of the meeting is the kind of document that historians prize, because it is detailed and specific and written without American political investment. He describes entering the president's office and finding a man who is significantly taller than he expected, though the photographs have been circulating for 2 years now. He describes the face, the prominent cheekbones, the deep-set eyes, the expression that he characterizes as melancholy in repose, but which transforms entirely when Lincoln begins to speak. An animation coming into it that the photographs can't capture. He describes the handshake, the heat of it, the roughness of the palm, the grip of a man who's been splitting rails and is not going to stop being that man just because he lives in the White House now. He describes the suit. He notes that the suit is not new and that the boots have some miles on them, and that the hair is in a condition that suggests a recent but not entirely successful engagement with a comb. He describes the conversation. It goes for an hour, which is longer than he expected, because Lincoln asks him questions about England, about how the war looks from London, about what people there think will happen, and listens to the answers with a focus that Dicey, who has interviewed prime ministers and foreign secretaries, finds startling. He says it is like being questioned by someone who actually wants to know the answer, which he notes is less common than you'd expect among powerful men. He writes that Lincoln, despite the appearance, which he characterizes as that of a county lawyer rather than a head of state, leaves him with the absolute conviction that the Union is in the right hands, that the strategic thinking is clear and unhurried and comprehensive, that the man under the hair and the suit and the boots is, in Dicey's estimation, exactly the right person for this specific impossible job. He publishes this in a British magazine. The piece circulates. Some people in England are reassured, some are sceptical. But the portrait Dicey draws is accurate in its essentials. The appearance and the substance running in their usual parallel, neither cancelling the other, both completely, irreducibly true. The cabinet. You meet with your cabinet in a room that has been set up for the purpose, around a long table, the secretaries of the various departments arranged by some informal principle of precedence that everyone understands and nobody has written down. Secretary of State Seward, who is brilliant and knows it and has accepted with more grace than expected the reality that you are running this war and not him. Secretary of War Stanton, who is meticulous and efficient and occasionally impossible, and is, despite all of this, exactly the right man for his job. The others, their departments, their opinions. You listen to everyone. This is one of your governing principles, to hear the arguments fully, to let people make their case before you make yours, and it is sometimes mistaken for weakness or indecision, which is an error in diagnosis. You are not indecisive, you are thorough. The decision, when it comes, comes from having heard everything, from having understood the full shape of the problem, from having waited until the right answer is visible, rather than acting on the first plausible answer to arrive. The cabinet meetings smell of the cabinet, wool and pipe tobacco mostly, with the particular note of a room full of men who are under enormous pressure, which has its own smell. You add your own contribution to the chemistry. By midday, by the time the cabinet convenes, you've been working for 6 or 7 hours, and the suit has been doing its work, and the room is warm with the combined effort of governing. Nobody says anything about this. Nobody's going to say anything about the president's suit to the president's face. The protocol doesn't exist and wouldn't be survived even if it did. You make decisions in this room that affect the lives of millions of people. You make them in a suit that has been through some things, and with hair that has done what it does, and with the full force of a mind that has never made the mistake of thinking that appearances are the same as substance. The decisions are good. They're not all correct. Some of them are wrong, and you know it when they go wrong and you correct course. But they are good in the sense of being made from the right ingredients. Full information, patient analysis, the willingness to wait for clarity rather than act on urgency. Good in the way of a legal argument that is built from the ground up, load-bearing beams in their proper places. The decisions outlast the suit by a considerable margin. On a particular Wednesday in September of 1864, after Atlanta has fallen to Sherman and the political picture has shifted and the election, which looked unwinnable in July, now looks possible, you are in your office at the end of a day that has included 2 cabinet meetings and 4 hours of petitioners and one very difficult conversation with a senator from Ohio about the state of things in that state. And your secretary, Hay, knocks and says there is no more urgent business today and you should sleep. You consider this. You have not been sleeping enough. This is a running condition. You have not been sleeping enough since approximately the beginning of the war, and your face, in the most recent photographs, carries this in the particular way that insufficient sleep carries, in a face that was already angular and strong. It deepens the lines, puts hollows under the eyes, sharpens everything until the face looks like something being drawn too hard. People who see you in person in this period, and who saw you in 1860 at the beginning, note the change. Some of them say you have aged 20 years in 4. You tell Hay good night. You go upstairs. The suit comes off. The boots come off. Finally, which is a specific physical relief that never loses its quality, no matter how many times it happens. The release of the leather from the ankle and the arch and the toe, the particular tiredness of feet that have been in boots for 12 hours expressing itself now, in the cool air of the bedroom, as something that is almost pleasure. The nightshirt on, the bed. Outside, the city continues. The city always continues. Washington in September of 1864 is a different city than it was in March of 1861. It is larger, louder, more crowded, full of the infrastructure of war that has built up over 4 years. The smell of it is different too. The camps and the hospitals and the supply wagons have given it a layer that wasn't there before, a specific overlay of organised mass human effort that is not quite the organic smell of a city, and not quite the smell of an army, but something in between. You hear it slightly through the window, then you don't hear it. Sleep comes the way it comes after long days, which is suddenly, without announcement, the mind still working on the last thing it was working on, and then not working on anything at all. The cold floor in the morning will come, the dispatches will come, the day will begin again before dawn, and the suit will go on, and the hair will be briefly engaged with by someone who cares about it more than you do, and the boots will go back on your feet, and you will go out and do the work again. That is tomorrow. Right now is just this. The bed, the dark, the window with the sounds of the city softening into something almost like quiet, the body that has hauled water from a spring a quarter-mile away and read Blackstone on a dirt floor and argued cases in the rain in central Illinois mud and signed the most important document in American history with a trembling hand and stood at Gettysburg with a disease it didn't know about yet and held the hands of dying men in hospital beds and lain on the floor of the presidential office to read a map of Virginia. This body, your body, asking for the hours that belong to rest and getting them now, finally in the dark. There is something specific about the way Lincoln smells to the men who oppose him in court. William Herndon notes it, but more interesting is the record left by a lawyer named Benjamin Edwards, who practiced in Springfield for decades and who tried at least 20 cases against Lincoln over the years. Edwards, late in his life, gave a long interview to a historian who was assembling material about the Illinois bar in the antebellum period. The historian was interested in legal procedure and precedent. Edwards, who was 76 and had been thinking about Lincoln for 30 years, kept returning to the physical. He describes being in an opposing counsel's chair while Lincoln addresses a jury. He describes the voice, higher than expected, with a carry to it that filled a room even when he wasn't trying to fill it. He describes the gestures, the long arms that when extended created a span that was almost theatrical in its reach. He describes the way Lincoln moved around the room when he was allowed to move, which was all the time because he never stood still when he could be walking, and the walking seemed connected to the thinking, as if the motion and the cognition were the same process. And then he says, "I have to tell you the truth about something," and he pauses, the historian writes, in the way of a man deciding whether to say a true thing that is slightly embarrassing. He says, Lincoln usually smelled of the road, not offensively, not in a way that stopped you thinking about anything else. But he smelled of a man who'd been on the move, had been living out of saddlebags, had been sleeping in taverns on the circuit and riding in weather and eating at whatever table was available. And here is the thing, Edward says. Here is the strange thing. It was part of the argument. Not deliberately. He wasn't using it deliberately. Lincoln never used anything he could avoid using because his arguments were efficient. He didn't add things. But there it was. The juries in McLean County and Tazewell County and all the other counties, those juries of farmers and merchants and tradespeople, they could smell the road on him. They recognized it. They'd smelled it on themselves. And so before he said a single word, they already understood, in the bones, that this was one of them. Not performing, not dressed up in something he wasn't. The thing itself. Edward says, I lost a lot of cases to that smell, which is one of the funnier things any lawyer has said about Abraham Lincoln on the record. The deeper rhythm of the presidency has its own cycle, different from the circuit, but having the same quality of repetition, the same accumulation. The morning dispatches, the cabinet meetings, the petitioners who line the corridor outside your office from 9 in the morning until you shut the door against them, which you do reluctantly and later than Hay would like, because every person in that corridor is there for a reason, and the reason matters even when you don't have time for it. The afternoons when the paperwork is relentless, the letters and orders and commissions and pardons and the 1,000 administrative acts of governing a nation at war, all of them requiring the specific combination of legal precision and plain language that you have been building since you first read Blackstone on the Indiana floor. The evenings when you walk to the telegraph office and you read the wire, and you go home and you read the dispatches again and you write your responses, and you go to bed and you get up and you do it again. The suit goes on. The suit comes off. The hair engages briefly with the comb and then remembers itself. The boots serve their function. The cold floor greets the morning. The work continues. This is the rhythm of the presidency conducted in a body that has never been interested in the maintenance of itself at the expense of the maintenance of everything else. Sometimes, in the small hours when the dispatches have been read and the responses written and the day is genuinely done, something else happens. Something that is not quite thought and not quite memory, but occupies a space between them. You're sitting in the chair by the window in your office. The candle is burning low. The window shows you Washington at night, the shape of the unfinished monument against the sky that is never quite dark because the army camps have fires and the city itself has gas lamps on the main streets, and the Potomac reflects all of it back in a way that makes the sky look like the underside of something rather than the surface. You are thinking, or you're not quite thinking. You're in the state that comes after thinking, when the mind has done its work and is resting, but not resting fully. The way a fire rests when you stop feeding it, still warm, still giving light, just no longer consuming. You're thinking about what the country is, not the political concept. You know the political concept. You know every argument. You have made every argument. You have argued them in tavern rooms and courthouses and formal debates, and you could argue them in your sleep and sometimes do. Not the political concept, but the actual thing. The country that exists in the lives of the people in it. The boy in the log cabin who learned to read. The lawyers on the circuit, all of them, not just you, all of them moving through central Illinois in the mud and the rain, building the scaffolding of law that a new place needs to be habitable. The farmers and the merchants and the tradespeople who make up the juries. The women who manage the households that make the whole thing possible. The soldiers who are sleeping tonight in the dark Virginia forest, or not sleeping, or not alive. The people who are enslaved, whose situation is what all of this is finally about, whose freedom is the thing that this war is paying for in currency you can't convert back. All of them. The country. The actual country, made of bodies and cold floors and hauled water and worn-out suits, and the accumulated smell of lives being lived. That is what you are trying to preserve. You sit with this for a while. The candle goes out on its own. The room is dark except for the light from the window, the reflected glow of the city and the camps. You stay in the chair for a few more minutes in the dark with the country around you. Then you go to bed. There is a specific smell to the Lincoln bedroom that the White House domestic staff notes in the records they keep. The internal records of household management that are not public documents, and are therefore more honest than the public documents. The smell of the bedroom in the morning, before the windows are opened and the room aired, is the smell of a man who runs very warm, and who sleeps in his nightshirt, and whose hair has been conducting its own business all night without supervision. It is not an unpleasant smell, the housekeeper's notes say. It is simply specific. It is the smell of Abraham Lincoln inhabiting a space. The same way his presence in a room is specific, is identifiable, is different from the presence of other people. The room gets aired. The sheets get changed on the schedule that the domestic staff maintains. The wash basin gets filled with water, hot from the kitchen, and the morning ablutions happen in whatever form they take on a given morning. By the time the president emerges, the bedroom smells like a bedroom. Until the next morning, when it smells like Abraham Lincoln again. The staff, from the cook to the housemaids to the senior housekeeper, have the particular warmth for him that people who see someone in their private moments tend to develop. He says good morning to them by name. He's interested in their families, their situations, their opinions. He stops in the kitchen sometimes, in his nightshirt at 5 a.m, looking for something to eat, and he talks to whoever is there with the same full attention he gives to senators. He doesn't notice the state he's in these moments. Doesn't notice the nightshirt or the hair or the bare feet. He just wants to know how your mother is doing, whether the child recovered from the fever, what you think about the latest news from Virginia. The cook, whose name is Mary Ann Cobb and who's worked in the White House kitchen since the Buchanan administration, says years later in an interview that Lincoln was the finest person she worked for in 20 years of White House service. She explains this not in terms of generosity or political greatness, but in terms that are simpler and more precise. He treated you like you were a person, she says, like you were the most interesting person in the room, even when he was in his nightshirt at 5 a.m. with his hair standing up every which way. Especially then, maybe. The law practice expands, the cases get bigger. Your reputation is building through the 1840s and into the 1850s, not as someone who wins every case. No lawyer wins every case. But as someone who understands the whole shape of a legal argument, who can find the point where the opposing position has a seam and find it quietly, without drama, and then put pressure on exactly that seam until the position separates. You try railroad cases and murder cases and cases about disputed land titles and cases about slavery, which in Illinois in the 1850s begin to press on everything, begin to make the law feel like it's straining at its joints. The slavery question. It comes up everywhere eventually, in the law and in the politics and in the sense you have. That has been building for years, that the country is heading somewhere, that the direction is determined, that the question of whether a man can own another man cannot be answered indefinitely with the compromise answer of both sides have a point, let's not push it. You begin, in the early 1850s, to push it. The Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858, 7 debates across Illinois, in county seats and state fairgrounds and town squares, you and Stephen Douglas talking about slavery and the future of the territories and what America is and what it's going to be. Douglas is 5 feet 4 inches of perfectly tailored suit and magnificent oratorical machinery, a man who sounds like a brass band when he's going, who fills a space with his voice and his presence in a way that makes his height irrelevant. He is the sitting United States Senator. He is the most famous politician in Illinois. He looks, on paper, like he should win. You stand beside him on the platform and you are 8 inches taller and significantly less polished, and your hair has done what your hair does, and your suit is the suit of a man who rides the circuit, and the contrast between you should favour Douglas. But you talk. You say the things you say in the way you say them, with the flatness and the directness and the strange music of your particular prose, which sounds simple until you try to imitate it, and discover that the simplicity is doing extremely precise work. You say that a house divided against itself cannot stand. You say it in a way that sounds like you're just describing the obvious thing, the thing everyone can see if they choose to look, and the obviousness of it is what makes it land. You lose the Senate race, but the debates get printed in newspapers across the country, and the country reads them, and the country, or a significant portion of it, has a new name in its head now. Abraham Lincoln, the tall one from Illinois, the one who smells like the circuit. Well, they don't write that part in the newspapers. but the men who cover the debates mention the hair and the ill-fitting clothes in letters home, in private correspondence, in memoirs written years later. They can't quite account for the gap between the appearance and the effect. The man looks like someone you'd pass on the street in Bloomington without a second glance, and then he opens his mouth and something happens. The 1860 Republican Convention in Chicago. You are not there. Candidates don't attend their own conventions in this era. They wait at home to be told the result. You wait in Springfield. Your managers, including David Davis, the circuit judge who knows you as well as anyone knows you, work the floor. You win on the third ballot. The nomination arrives by telegram. The campaign requires photographs. Matthew Brady's studio and others produce images of you that will be distributed across the North to put a face to the name. Lincoln, the candidate for president, and what does he look like? The photographs require preparation. Mary prepares. This is one of the genuine preparations. She oversees the suit, not the circuit suit, but the good suit, the formal one, and ensures it is pressed. She oversees the collar, which is a separate item of clothing in this era. A stiff white collar that attaches to the shirt and provides the formal appearance, while the shirt itself does the actual work of absorbing things. She attends to the hair as much as the hair permits. You go to the studio. In the photographs you look like a president. You look serious and large and possessed of a face that has more topography than a conventional face. It's all planes and angles, nothing quite where you'd expect it, but the camera finds something in it, finds the gravity, finds the dignity that coexists with the smells and the hair and the boots. The photographs do not smell. This is one of photography's great gifts to historical posterity. You win the election in November of 1860. Before you take office in March of 1861, 7 states have seceded from the Union. They say they'll leave if a Republican is elected, and they meant it, and they are doing it. By the time you take the oath of office, there is already a Confederate government in Montgomery, Alabama, with Jefferson Davis as its president, and the question is no longer whether the nation will divide, but whether you can put it back together. You move to Washington, the White House. Now let me tell you something about the White House in 1861 that doesn't often get a full chapter in the histories, because it is not the kind of detail that fits the dignity of the institution, and the dignity of the institution is something that American political history guards jealously. Here is the thing. The White House in 1861 is not in the condition you might assume it to be. Not in terms of appearance. The exterior is impressive. The public rooms are lavishly, if somewhat eclectically furnished. There are chandeliers and gilded mirrors and the markers of official grandeur everywhere you look. But the infrastructure, the water. The White House draws its water from a cistern on the roof, which is supplied by a pipeline that originates in a reservoir some miles away. The pressure in this system is inconsistent. The pipe is aging. The water that arrives through the pipe is not water of the quality that anyone in the 21st century would describe as clean. It picks up whatever the pipe and the cistern choose to add to it, which varies seasonally. In wet years it smells of the particular organic chemistry of a reservoir in a humid climate. In dry years it is scarcer than you'd like. The Potomac River is nearby. The White House draws from the Potomac for some purposes. The Potomac in 1861 is receiving the runoff from an army that will, within months, be encamped nearby in numbers that reach 100,000 men. And army encampments and rivers have a relationship that is not good for the quality of the water downstream. There is a bathtub. One bathtub in the family quarters. It is a large metal tub, Not a modern fixture with hot and cold running water, but a standalone tub that must be filled by servants carrying water that has been heated in the kitchen. This process requires planning. It requires someone to decide in advance that a bath is going to happen, and to initiate the sequence of events, heating the water, carrying it upstairs, filling the tub, and to have you available at the end of that sequence in a state of readiness to actually get in. This last requirement is the one that most often fails. You're not good at being in the right place at the right time for a bath. You're good at being in the right place at the right time for almost everything the presidency requires. You're notably punctual for appointments. You read dispatches the moment they arrive. You're rarely caught without a response to something that needs a response. But the bath requires a kind of domestic scheduling that sits outside the category of things you manage with the same precision. Mary manages it. She manages it with the same competent determination she brought to the Springfield house and the circuit suit and the hair before photographs. She ensures that the servants know the schedule, and that the schedule includes provision for the president's bath on appropriate occasions. She considers appropriate occasions to include more occasions than you do. This gap is consistent across the marriage and has never fully closed. The White House in 1861 also lacks indoor toilets in the modern sense. The family uses chamber pots in the bedrooms, which are emptied by servants, and the exterior facilities behind the building, which are the same basic technology as the privy in the backyard at 8th and Jackson, just with somewhat grander architectural framing. Washington, D.C. itself in 1861 is not a finished city. The Capitol dome is under construction. The Washington Monument stands half its eventual height and has been stalled by funding problems for decades. The streets are a mixture of paved stone, packed dirt, and the particular mud of a river city that has been built on what is essentially a swamp. The city smells in summer of the Potomac Flats at low tide, which is a powerful smell of organic decomposition that hits visitors before they've fully processed the grandeur of the neoclassical architecture. There are also, as the war begins and troops concentrate in the city, army camps. Army camps smell like army camps, which is to say they smell like concentrated human occupation of insufficient sanitary facilities, and the wind off the river carries this into the city on certain days with a directness that requires no metaphor. This is the city where you will spend the next 4 years. You get to work immediately. The work is trying to stop the country from ceasing to exist as a country, which means trying to fight a war that you are not, at first, winning. The generals are a problem. The Union Army in 1861 and into 1862 is led by George McClellan, who is an excellent organizer and a meticulous preparer, and a man who, given sufficient time and resources, might eventually fight the war, and who in practice will not fight the war under any circumstances short of total certainty of victory. And in war, total certainty of victory is a thing that does not exist. You wait for McClellan to fight. You read dispatches. You go to the telegraph office in the War Department building next door, which you can reach through a path across the lawn, and you wait with the operators for the latest from the front. The telegraph office at 2 a.m. has a specific quality of light and sound. The click of the instrument, the smell of the machine oil and the wax candles, the particular silence of waiting for news that might be good or catastrophic, and won't distinguish between the possibilities until it arrives. You sit in this light and this silence, and you wait. Your suit during these sessions has absorbed everything the day has given it. The day gives it a great deal. The presidential workday in wartime begins early and ends late, and doesn't respect the body's preferences about things like the suit's rest schedule. You put the suit on in the morning and the suit goes through the day with you. The morning dispatches, the cabinet meeting, the senators who arrive with opinions, the newspaper editors who arrive with demands, the mothers who arrive with photographs of their sons and the sons' cases to argue, the generals who arrive with requests, the ambassadors who arrive with carefully worded communications from governments, watching to see which way this goes. All of it in the suit. The suit gets aired sometimes. Mary ensures that it is brushed by the servants, that it is pressed before important occasions, that the worst accumulations of the week are managed. This is what keeping up appearances looks like from the inside. Constant, competent maintenance work by someone who understands the stakes. The suit comes back to something presentable. You wear it again. It accumulates again. On a particular Monday morning in February of 1862, you're in your office and someone brings you a note, and the note says that your son Willie has taken a turn. Willie is 11 years old. He is your son who is like you in the ways that cut deepest. The curiosity, the humour, the interest in everything. He's been sick for a week with what the doctors describe as bilious fever, which is what they call it when a child in Washington in 1862 gets typhoid from the contaminated water supply. The water that comes through the pipes to the White House cistern, the water that you draw partly from the Potomac, the water that an army of 100,000 men is currently using for everything upriver, and the river doesn't distinguish between clean and unclean when it runs. Willie is feverish on Sunday. By Monday he is worse. By Wednesday of that week he is dead. He is buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Georgetown. You don't attend the burial. Mary cannot. The grief is too great and too close, and the two of you handle it in opposite ways, which is that Mary's grief is enormous and external and needs constant management, and yours goes somewhere else, goes somewhere deep and internal, and comes out only in the moments when no one is there to see it. You visit his grave, at night, sometimes, alone. You ride out to Oak Hill in the dark and you sit with him. What you smell like on these rides is not something that gets recorded, but you can imagine it. The dark suit and the long wool overcoat and the hat and the smell of horse and the night air of Washington in winter, which is cold and smells of the river and the distant army camps, and underneath all of that, simply you. The work continues. It has to continue because the war doesn't stop for private grief. The war doesn't stop for anything. It is the winter of 1862 and McClellan still isn't fighting, and the Confederate army is intact, and the casualty figures from the battles that have happened are already staggering, and everyone who understands the arithmetic knows they are going to get worse. You fire McClellan. Eventually, you fire multiple generals. You go through them, looking for someone who will fight, who will apply the pressure that eventually grinds the enemy down, who understands that a war of attrition favours the side with more men and more industry, which is you, but only if someone actually uses the advantage. You find eventually in Ulysses Grant someone who understands this. Grant is not polished. Grant smells sometimes of bourbon, which is a choice some of his colleagues make much of and you make nothing of, because you're not a man who holds another man's private consolations against him when the man is winning battles. Grant wins battles. That is the metric. During these years, the years of searching for the general who will fight, you also write. You write the Emancipation Proclamation. You draft it and revise it and argue with your cabinet about it and revise it again, and you sign it on January 1st, 1863, after 3 hours of shaking hands at the New Year's Day reception, with your right hand trembling from the effort of 3 hours of handshakes, and your determination that the signature will not tremble, that you will let your hand rest until the trembling stops, and then you will sign it steady because the steadiness matters, the record of your certainty matters, and so you wait, and then you sign. Abraham Lincoln. The largest and most deliberate signature you ever put on a document. Your hand, before you signed it, had shaken 4,000 hands. It had not, in the recent past, been introduced to soap. These are both true, and neither negates the other. The Emancipation Proclamation is signed by a man whose right hand is cramped, and whose suit needs attention, and whose hair has been doing its own thing since before breakfast. It is the most important document in American history since the Declaration of Independence, and it is written in your plain, powerful, load-bearing prose and signed with those shaking hands on that January morning, and it is real. November of 1863. You need to go to Gettysburg. The battle happened in July. 3 days, 51,000 casualties between both sides, the largest battle ever fought in the Western Hemisphere. The bodies of the Union dead are being moved to a new military cemetery on the battle site, and there is a ceremony of dedication, and the organisers have asked you to attend and to add, as they put it, a few appropriate remarks following the main oration by Edward Everett. Edward Everett is the finest orator in America. He will speak for 2 hours. Your remarks, which you have been thinking about for weeks, which you have been shaping in the same way you shape everything, finding the true thing and building out from it, are 10 sentences long. You feel unwell when you board the train to Gettysburg. Not dramatically unwell. Not the kind of unwell that stops a man who's been doing impossible things for 3 years. Just a headache. A tiredness that feels different from the accumulated tiredness of the office. A heaviness in your limbs that you attribute to the weight of the occasion, which is real and considerable. The train carries you north through Maryland and into Pennsylvania. The other people on the train include cabinet members, several senators, your personal secretaries. They note that you look pale. You wave this off. You arrive in Gettysburg in the evening. There is a reception. You attend it, shaking hands in the way you always shake hands, the full grip, the real attention. You're tired. Your head aches. You go to bed earlier than you would normally, which is not particularly early, but earlier. In the morning, the ceremony. The crowd is enormous. 15,000 people, estimates say, spread across the hillside of the new cemetery, with the white grave markers and the November sky above Pennsylvania, which is grey and cold and honest. Edward Everett speaks for 2 hours. You listen. You have read his speech in advance, and it is masterful and long and full of classical allusions and exactly what a formal dedication speech in 1863 is supposed to be. Then you stand. You are standing, the tallest thing visible for a considerable distance. The stovepipe hat adds height. You have a copy of your speech in your pocket, but you largely know it. You have been living with these sentences for weeks, and they are yours now, settled into you like everything that belongs. You speak for 2 minutes and 4 seconds. You say that this nation was conceived in liberty and dedicated to a proposition. You say that the question now is whether that nation can endure. You say that the men who died here consecrated this ground, and your words can add nothing to that consecration. You say that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. 10 sentences. The crowd is quiet when you finish. Eerily, uncomfortably quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that happens when something lands in people, in a way that makes applause feel like the wrong response. Then the applause comes. Everett writes to you the following day. I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes. You read the letter at the White House. You are sick. Not the mild unwell of the Gettysburg morning, the real thing. The disease has fully declared itself now, after the trip home, after the ceremony, after the handshakes at the reception. Declares itself in the manner of its kind. Fever, headache, rash beginning to appear on the face, the characteristic progression of variola major. Smallpox. You have smallpox. You're confined to the White House. The doctors confirm the diagnosis. They prescribe rest and whatever the medicine of 1863 can offer, which is not much because there is nothing that fights smallpox except the immune system, and your immune system is, at this point in the war, doing the same thing as everything else in the administration, working harder than it should with fewer resources than it needs. The fever is real. It climbs high enough to make thinking difficult, which for you is a particular indignity because thinking is your primary tool and you rely on it even on the good days. You lie in the official bed in the White House bedroom and you sweat and the dispatches still come because the war doesn't stop for presidential smallpox. And you read what you can and write what you must in a handwriting that is noticeably less controlled than your usual, the letters larger and less precise. The grip on the pen uncomfortable because your hands ache. Your valet, William Johnson, gets sick. Johnson is a free black man from Springfield who's worked with you for years and made the journey to Washington with you and been part of the household since the beginning of the presidency. He contracted the disease from you, most likely, in the days after Gettysburg when you were incubating it and shedding it invisibly, on the train, in the carriage, in the White House rooms. He is sicker than you. He survives the smallpox. He dies of typhoid fever a few months later, weakened. You pay for his funeral yourself. There are other people who get sick in the weeks after Gettysburg. The connection to you is difficult to prove with certainty in the records, but the timing and the proximity are what they are. You stood in front of 15,000 people at Gettysburg. You shook hands at the reception. You travelled on a train with several hundred people. You were contagious. You didn't know. The incubation period for smallpox is 10 to 17 days. You might have been infected 5 days before the speech. The disease was in you, replicating, preparing its declaration, and you stood up in front of 15,000 people and said the words that would be read by every schoolchild in America for the next 160 years, and you were already sick. You make a joke about it. This is typical. This is the move when reality gets sufficiently absurd, when the situation is bad enough that the only frame that accommodates it is the comic one. You tell visitors, when you're well enough to receive them from your sick bed, which is earlier than the doctors would like, I now have something to give everybody. The people who've been lining up outside your office since the day you took office wanting things, appointments, pardons, contracts, commissions. Now you have smallpox. You have something to give everybody. This joke does what your jokes always do. It names the reality and then tilts it so that the naming becomes slightly bearable. The situation is terrible and you're sick and someone died and the war is still happening, and you turned an enormous cemetery dedication into a 2-minute speech that will outlast everything, and you did it while incubating one of history's most contagious diseases, and you find the comedy in this because finding the comedy is, for you, the equipment that makes the rest of it possible. You recover. You always recover. You have been recovering from things your whole life. A Saturday morning in the spring of 1864. You wake before the servants. This is typical. The body, whatever else it needs, doesn't need as much sleep as other bodies seem to. 4 or 5 hours is often enough. 6 is generous, and the remaining hours of the night are your hours, the hours before the day's machinery gets moving, before hay arrives with the dispatches, before the senators and generals and petitioners begin assembling in the anteroom. Your feet find the floor. The White House floor is cold in the morning. Of course it is. Floors in the morning are always cold. This goes back to the dirt floor of the Kentucky cabin, runs through the attic room of the Springfield boarding house, arrives here in the family quarters of the White House in the spring of 1864, and the cold is the same. The particular shock of warm feet meeting cold floor, the moment of recalibration, the shift from the warmth of sleep into the temperature of the day. You find your slippers. Someone has left them exactly where you'll find them, which is the kind of thing the White House domestic staff does, anticipating your movements with a precision that you privately find faintly uncanny. The slippers are a gift from someone. You can't remember who. There are too many gifts. People send things constantly. They fit, which is remarkable, because finding things that fit when you wear a size 14 is never guaranteed. You pad down the corridor in your nightshirt. This corridor, in the family quarters of the White House, is where you walk every morning before anyone else is awake. And it has a quality that the public rooms don't have, a slightly worn quality. The quality of space that is actually lived in rather than curated for occasions. The wallpaper is somewhat scuffed near the corners. The floor creaks in specific places you know by now and navigate around so as not to wake Mary. Your office. The presidential office is a room that smells of paper and candle wax and the tobacco you chew sometimes, absorbed into everything, and something else that is harder to name. The smell of decisions, if that makes sense. The smell of a room where things are decided that affect the lives of millions of people, which is not a smell that has a name but which is distinctive enough that years later, people who entered this office will remember it. You sit at the desk. There are dispatches from last night on the edge of the desk. You read them in order of what Hay considered most urgent. They are about Spotsylvania, where Grant is pushing and the Confederate army is pushing back, and the cost is what the cost always is, which is men. Young men, mostly. Not as young as they look in the photographs that come back with the regiments. The photographs' flattened faces somehow make everyone look younger, but young enough. You write responses in your large angular handwriting, the handwriting of a self-taught man who developed his own system and never entirely corrected it. The responses are precise. The language is exact. You have a gift for legal and administrative language that strips away everything that isn't load-bearing and leaves only what must be said. And you use this gift on the dispatch responses at 5 a.m. in your nightshirt just as you'd use it at 2 p.m. in the suit. The suit is on the chair in the bedroom. It will need to go on soon. The day requires the suit. The suit, at this point in the war, has a character. It has been through things. It has been pressed by the servants and aired and maintained as well as wool can be maintained under these conditions. But the conditions are what they are, and the suit carries them. It carries the dispatches and the cabinet meetings and the hospital visits and the telegraph office at 2 a.m, and the speeches and the handshakes and the ceremonies and the grief. Mary will ensure it is presentable before any particular occasion. The servants will brush it. The collar will be fresh. The The boots will have been at least wiped. But a suit itself, the wool itself, has absorbed what it's absorbed, and no amount of brushing gets entirely inside wool. You go to the hospitals. You go regularly, more regularly than the schedule strictly requires, more regularly than your staff would like, because they worry about security and about the wear of it on you, which is a legitimate worry. The hospitals are full of dying men, and the dying men want to see the president, and you feel that the least you can do, given that you are the reason they are there, is be present. You put on the formal suit on these mornings. The hair gets its morning's engagement with the comb, which is more than it usually gets. The boots are acceptable. You do not look like the portrait, but you look like a man who has made an effort, which is what the occasion calls for. The hospital smell arrives before you're through the door. There is carbolic acid, which the doctors are beginning to use for wound cleaning, a sharp chemical edge to the air. There is the smell of suppuration, which is the polite medical term for infected wounds, which is what most of the wounds become, given that this is 1864, and germ theory is new and antiseptic technique is newer, and the full implementation of it is still happening in real time, on real patients, with results that are getting better but not fast enough. There is laudanum, the opium tincture that manages pain because there is no alternative. There is the particular warm sweetness of many people in a confined space, the smell of bodies that have been horizontal for a long time, the smell of blankets that are washed when there is time and there is never quite enough time. You walk in, and the men who can see the door look up. Then something happens that visitors to these hospitals describe later. The men who can move, even the ones who've been still for days, try to sit up. They try to straighten themselves. The president is here, and you do not lie sprawling when the president is here. You say, don't, every time. Some version of, don't get up, you've earned your rest. And then you go to them. You are a very tall man in a black suit in a room of horizontal men, and you go to each bed one at a time, and you sit on whatever is available, a chair, a stool, an upended crate, and you lean down to their level and you talk to them. You ask them where they're from, what they did before the war, what they are going to do after. You hold the hands of men who have hands. You sit with the men who don't. A lot of them cry, not from pain, necessarily, though the pain is constant and real. They cry because the attention is real, because here is the man who signed the orders, and he came. He is here in the room, in his suit that has been through things, with his hair that has done what it does, and he is sitting with them like they are particular and not general, like their names and not numbers. Some of them are very young. You sit with the young ones for longer. After the hospitals, you drive back through Washington in the carriage, through streets that carry the double life of a city that is also a war capital. People buying bread and tending children alongside the supply wagons and the ambulances, and the men in uniform moving in every direction with the controlled urgency of a military machine running full out. You look out the window. You don't say much. The hospital has given the suit one more layer. Everything you carry inside yourself is one layer thicker. The dispatches and the faces and the hands, the names you ask for and the names you'll never learn because some of them die before you come back. You go back to the White House. You go back to work. You pick up the pen and you read what needs reading, and you write what needs writing, and the afternoon continues. This is what it is. The evenings of the war years have a texture that is different from the days. The days are dense with official purpose, every hour accounted for, every meeting meaning something, every piece of paper requiring a decision. The evenings are slightly looser. Not empty. There are dispatches in the evenings too, there are letters, there is always something, but there are windows, gaps, moments when the machinery runs without you for an hour. Sometimes you go to the theatre. The theatre is your real pleasure, the genuine escape, the thing that takes you fully out of the wartime present and puts you somewhere else for a few hours. Mary loves the theatre, and she is right to love it. And on the evenings when you can go, you go. You dress for it with more care than usual. The formal suit, the one with the striped trousers that will later live in the Smithsonian. The collar precise, the hair in the best condition Mary's work can achieve. You arrive, and the audience sees you in the presidential box, and there is the response, the applause, the standing, the acknowledgement. And you acknowledge them and sit down, and the play begins. For 2 or 3 hours you are not the president. You're a man in a theatre watching people tell a story, and your face in those hours does something it doesn't do in the office or the telegram room or the hospitals. It relaxes. Actually relaxes the muscle holding the jaw, the weight around the eyes, the humour in you, which is always there but usually working in service of something, the joke that manages a moment or diffuses attention, works in the theatre for its own sake. You laugh, really laugh, from somewhere genuine, at something on the stage that catches you by surprise, and the laugh is big and unguarded, and people nearby in the theatre hear it, and some of them will write about it later, about the sound of the president laughing at a comedy in the middle of the Civil War. The way the laugh was just itself, nothing performed, nothing measured. In the carriage going home, the suit has the theatre in it now, the smell of candlelight and other people's perfume, and the warmed air of the playhouse. One more layer over everything else. The White House receives you, the night staff, the nodded acknowledgement, the last dispatches of the day, which you take up to the office and read standing, sometimes too tired to sit. The note about tomorrow's schedule from Hay. The note about a general who needs an answer by morning. You answer it. Then you go upstairs. The bedroom is quiet and dark. Mary asleep, or nearly. Your nightshirt on the chair by the bed, laid out by the domestic staff with the quiet efficiency of people who manage your private life with a skill and a discretion that you rarely acknowledge openly but depend on completely. You change. You sit on the edge of the bed for a moment in the dark. Your feet are on the cold floor. Here it is again. The constant. The thing that runs from the log cabin in Kentucky through the Indiana frontier, through the Springfield boarding house, through the circuit courthouses, through the White House bedroom, and has never changed. The cold floor in the morning, the cold floor at night. The floor that says, here you are. Here is the ground. Here is where you stand. Outside, Washington continues. The night sounds of a city at war. The distant rumble of a supply wagon. The call of a sentinel somewhere on the White House perimeter. The sound of the river if the wind is right. The city doesn't sleep exactly. It quiets. It does the minimum that night allows and gets ready to resume. You think about the dispatches. Then you think about something else. The thing you don't talk about much. The inner accounting that happens in the dark. The reviewing of the books of your own life. The quiet assessment of where things stand. You have been doing this your whole life. In every dark and quiet room. Going back to the loft in the Indiana cabin with Sarah breathing beside you. The review. What happened. What it means. What comes next. What comes next is unresolved. The war is not won yet. The election is this fall and you might not win it. The country is exhausted and the war is not going fast enough. And there are people, serious people, who think you should be replaced by someone willing to negotiate a peace. Grant is pushing in Virginia, and Sherman is moving on Atlanta, and the summer is coming. The bad summer when the casualty figures climb into numbers that make people quiet at dinner tables, and whether it's enough, whether the people will hold, whether the Union holds, is something you don't know. Nobody knows. The body knows something, though. The body that carries 55 years of cold floors and wood smoke and lye soap and circuit mud and dispatch rooms and hospital smell. The body that has been used its whole life for the work it was made for, which is not cleanliness and not grooming and not the careful maintenance of a physical presentation. It has been used for thinking and walking and carrying wood and reading Blackstone and arguing cases and shaking hands and writing sentences and sitting with dying men and signing documents and standing at Gettysburg in November when the disease was already in it. Used, that is the word. The body used for the purpose it came with, applied to the task at hand, maintained at the minimum required to keep working, not a thing to be tended but a thing to be deployed. This has cost things. Mary will tell you it has cost things. The suit has cost things. The years on the circuit cost things. The smallpox cost William Johnson. The contaminated water cost Willie. The body carries all of that too. You close your eyes. The sounds of Washington are still there, far below, far away. The night settling into itself. The war going on somewhere to the south, in the dark Virginia forests, where men on both sides are trying to sleep in the cold and the mud, and some of them won't wake up. You breathe. Tomorrow there will be Grant's dispatch about Spotsylvania. Tomorrow there will be the senators and the petitioners and the men who need answers. Tomorrow the suit will go on, and the hair will do whatever the hair does, and the day will begin before dawn with the cold floor and the walk to the office and the reading of whatever arrived while you slept. But that is tomorrow. Right now there is just the bed, just the dark, just the sounds of a city that holds more than 500,000 people trying to get through to morning, each of them carrying their own particular version of everything. You were a boy in a log cabin who learned that the body is something you use. You were a lawyer who read Blackstone on a dirt floor and never fully updated his relationship with soap. You were a husband who drove Mary slightly mad with the boots and the hair and the shirt. You were a man who gave the most important speech of his century, while already sick with smallpox, not knowing. The disease in him, and the words coming out clear and steady and absolutely right. You were all of that in this body, this specific, unrepeatable 6'4", poorly combed, genuinely warm body. And centuries will pass, and they have, and the log cabin where you were born is a monument now with a marble building around it, and people come from across the world to look at it. The White House has hot and cold running water in every room and a staff of dozens and a security perimeter and all the infrastructure of a modern presidential residence. But people still wake up before dawn with things unresolved, still carry the weight of what they've been asked to carry, still find the floor cold in the morning every morning the same way it was cold in February of 1809, when a woman named Nancy Hanks wrapped a new baby in a log cabin in Kentucky, and the fire burned low, and the cold floor waited for the morning. Some things don't change. The human body doesn't change, not the part that matters, not the part that finds the cold floor and says, yes, here we are. Here is where we begin. Let your thoughts slow now. Let the dispatches go. They'll be there in the morning. The dispatches are always there in the morning. Let the war go for now. For these hours, it will still be there. Let the suit be where it is on the chair. Let the hair do what the hair does. Let the floor be cold, and let the blankets be warm, and let the sounds of whatever city you're in tonight, whatever version of a city that has 500,000 people trying to get through to morning, let those sounds be the sounds of other lives. Not yours, not your concern for the next few hours. You are warm enough, fed enough, done enough for tonight. Tomorrow there will be more. There is always more tomorrow. But that is tomorrow. Right now, in this moment, in this particular arrangement of dark and quiet, there is only this: the slowness of breath, the weight of the blanket, these sounds getting farther. Or maybe you're getting farther from the sounds. The boundary blurring, the way it does at the end of long days when the body finally decides that it has done what it came to do, and it wants its hours now, its simple hours, the hours that belong only to being alive and not to any of the enormous things alive requires. Let it come. The dark is soft, the quiet is real. You've carried enough for today. Let sleep take you the way it took him. The boy who started in Kentucky and ended in history and carried, the whole way, a body that was never quite clean and never quite combed and smelled like the life he was actually living rather than the life the portrait shows. The same cold floor, the same warm blanket, the same sounds going quiet. You've earned this. Take it. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. The way the river slows at a bend, the way a fire slows when the wood runs low, the way all things slow when the day is done. The bells are somewhere distant, marking an hour you're too far into sleep to count. Good night.